Well, hello, everyone. It's great to see you all here. Loving to see the familiar faces that I haven't seen in a while. And of course, we always welcome those who are new here for the first time. So welcome. It's great to see you all. So, as you know, we've spent the last few weeks, I don't even know how long it's been, studying the Bhikkhuni Samyutta and also the beautiful poems of these Terrys translated by the amazing Charles Halsey of Harvard University. So it's been a really moving and wonderful experience sharing these beautiful suttas as well as the poems of these Terrys with you all. And we're really excited tonight. We have our fabulous Diane Brodson, member of Sutta in the City from its inception, who has said that she will share the history of how we were brought these poems in the first place by someone who is worthy of note, of veneration, of our gratitude, and that so few of us know about. And so this is going to really provide a nice, well-rounded perspective of what we know about the Buddhist teachings and how they came to us. It's something that we don't often think about, but my gosh, if it weren't for some of these brave people who came and went to these, Southeast Asia, we wouldn't have these teachings. And I'm not even gonna give too much intro because I know that Diane is going to fill any and all of the blanks that I've left open for you. And Stephen, is there anything that you wanted to bring up before Diane begins her instruction for us?
Well, I have to hold back. I feel like there's so much I want to say about Mrs. Rhys-Davids and how she's such an exciting person and such an exciting scholar. But of course, Diane knows much more than I do about her, and so I'll leave it to her. But I think it's going to be exciting to hear about her, and hopefully we'll have a bit of a Q&A. And I already have some questions, and perhaps you will too. So maybe without any further ado, we'll pass the baton to Diane.
Well, thank you, Regina, and thank you, Stephen. I want to talk about this, which I ordered, I believe, last year. And it was interrupted by the pandemic. I didn't get it until just a few weeks ago. And when it arrived, it was wrapped in several layers of brown paper and very strong tape. It took a lot of strength, actually, to unwrap this book. And when I did, the first thing I noticed was the author's name, Mrs. Rhys-Davids. Also on the title page, Mrs. Rhys-Davids, not her full name. I had read a little about her in Susan Murcott's book. Am I supposed to be sharing the screen? Hello?
You can if you like, if you have material to share with us.
Yes, I do.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Diane.
Wait 1 second.
Sure.
Running into technological difficulties. Screen sharing. Wait. Have to move this down. Aha, there, the book. And I had read about her in this book by Susan Murcott, The First Buddhist Women. She wrote that after Mrs. Rhys-Davids had completed her translation of those poems, a noted publisher declined to even read them. So the Rhys-Davids published the book on their own. I received from Stephen several links, and most of what I say today is going to be the direct result of all of the research that Stephen did and sent to me. Thank you, Stephen. The Wikipedia article that I looked at, because of course you know, that's a first go-to place for an old librarian. Carolyn Augusta Foley, born in England. Her father was the vicar of Wadhurst. It also mentioned that there had been a terrible tragedy in her family, the Foley family, 2 years before she was born. So, wouldn't you know, Stephen actually found a video clip about the tragedy in the Foley family. So, Regina, could you play that now? I am going to stop my share.
Okay, very good. And I will start my share. Okay.
He succeeded Robert Gardiner to become.
Pardon me.
In 1846, at the age of 40, the Reverend John Foley succeeded Robert Gardiner to become the 42nd vicar of the parish of Wadhurst. With him came his wife Caroline, who he had married that year at Elmley Castle Church in Worcestershire. John Foley came from an ecclesiastical family. Both father and grandfather were ordained before him. His father had presided at his recent wedding. With his new appointment and new wife, John Foley set about making a life for them both in their rural community. The Reverend proved, if nothing else, to be extremely fertile. Over the next 9 years, Caroline produced no less than 7 children. Nothing for the first 2 years, then after that, 1 every year, as regular as clockwork. Tragically though, on October the 29th, 1851, their third child, Mary, was struck down and died at the age of 3. Her memorial is engraved in the plain glass window in the chancel to the left of the altar. A sad reminder of her short life. Simple evidence of her parents' loss and despair. And then, after seeing this window, you might find reason to look again at the windows alongside. Make note of the names and the dates, and gradually, in stages, come to understand the sorrow sheltered within the walls of Wadhurst Church. Because the Foley children were dying. 4 short years after the death of Mary, in the winter of 1856, the family was struck by diphtheria. But in 1856, the only treatments for diphtheria were garlic, comfort, and prayer. Diphtheria is a dreadful, rasping disease, almost eradicated today. Small white spots on the tonsils, accompanied by fever and difficulty in swallowing. Gradually the spots enlarge, ulcerate, and the act of swallowing becomes painful. The fever increases, headache and restlessness. Then the fever seems to break, but very unexpectedly, slowness of breath and wheezing take place. Within a day from this change, the breathing at first falls to 18 respirations per minute, then to 16, and finally to 10 or 8. The first to be struck down was Augusta Ann, the Foley's 6-year-old daughter. She lost her gasping battle for life on December the 10th, 1855, just 2 weeks before her 7th birthday. To have lost one child from your family must have been unbearable. To watch while a second slowly died, unimaginable. But now, the entire family was sick and falling weaker by the day. Despite their mother's desperate care and their father's frantic prayers, 1 week later, on December the 17th, 1855, Celia Foley, aged 5, succumbed to the disease. And almost in fear, you move to the next memorial window. And there the full horror is exposed. For on that same December day in 1855, Celia's sister, Caroline Martha, also lost her fight for life. She was just 4 years old. For 3 children to die in just 7 short days, I don't think it's possible to begin to imagine the pain. With Christmas just 1 week away, funerals to arrange, overwhelmed by grief, the entire family sick and fighting for their lives. It must have been a time beyond desperation. That Christmas, the entire parish of Wadhurst would have rallied round the Foley family, their vicar leading them in prayer. Prayers for a better new year. A new year that might deliver them from this terrible void into which they'd inexplicably fallen. But it seems that God was busy elsewhere. On the 3rd of January 1856, Richard Edward Foley, aged 7 months, was taken back to his Maker's arms. His mother, his father, the entire parish's prayers not enough to save him. 3 days later, 20-month-old Robert Foley joined his brother. They were buried together in the grounds of the church. I don't think we can begin to conceive the helplessness of the father. His faith surely tested beyond endurance. 1 winter month had brought the death of 5 children, each one following the next for no reason and to no purpose. I can't comprehend the suffering of his wife Caroline, or how she could manage to carry on. Each day on waking, 1 more child was gone. Another was sick, and so little to be done. For the rest of her days, the torment of the first morning's thought, the awful realization that her 6 children were gone, lost forever in that one agonizing winter month. But carry on she must, because still there was one faint hope. Still there was her last son, John, 7-year-old John, who had watched as his brothers and sisters perished around him. John, who would have tearfully attended the funerals at his parents' side, totally unable to understand what on earth was going on. Caroline saved her son John from the diphtheria epidemic. She nursed him through, and he survived. The family faith wasn't broken. Following in his father's footsteps, the Reverend Canon John Foley was to die peacefully in Bangalore, India, at 80 years of age. And perhaps this is the greatest secret hidden at Wadhurst Church. Caroline was able to save her son John, and as we mentioned before, if nothing else, her husband was extremely fertile. Caroline would produce 3 more children, all of whom would outlive her as children should. She lived on until 1898. After 42 long years of living with that moment of anguish which came with every dawn, she too was laid to rest alongside her children in the peaceful grounds of Wadhurst Church. Her remaining children made the most of their chances in life and went on to great things, mainly on the continent of India. A solicitor, a famous Buddhist academic scholar, the Canon of Bangalore. Caroline and John's grandson even became a famous World War I pilot. Arthur Percival Foley Rhys-Davids, the top student and former captain of Eton, shot down no less than 25 enemy planes. Rhys-Davids would confess to his mother that once in the air he became a different man, too daring for safety's sake. In what was one of the most famous dogfights in aviation history, he shot down the German fighter ace Werner Voss. Rhys-Davids was awarded a Distinguished Service Order, an MC, and then, after his 13th victory, a bar. After flying out one morning on the 27th of October 1917, at just 20 years of age, he failed to return. He was finally posted as missing in action. The Germans sent word that they had buried his body with full military honours. There is no memorial to him at Wadhurst Church.
Okay, so that was a nice intro into Rhys-Davids and her family. So, Diane, how did this affect her and her choices in life? seems very profound and so much that she and her family went through. It reminds one of the story of Patachara. You know, when we studied that sutta, some of us thought, well, this is just made up. It can't be that all of these family members could die so tragically. But we see that even in the modern era, yes, this is possible.
Yes, her mother was 40 years old when she watched 5 children die. So Carolyn grew up in a family where that terrible tragedy happened. It must have made a lasting impression on her. I think that when she was reading about Patachara or Kisagotami, she must have remembered stories and thought of her mother. And I often wondered, did she ever talk to her mother about the work that she was doing? Growing up, she was kept at home. She was homeschooled by her father. And later she attended the University College in London, one of the first women students studying philosophy, psychology, economics. And as a student, she was a writer and a vocal campaigner in the movements for poverty relief, children's rights, women's suffrage. And these causes remained lifetime interests for her. Before moving into the Buddhist studies, she translated articles for the Economics Journal from German, French, and Italian. What a facility, what an aptitude she had for languages: Sanskrit, English, Pali, German, French, Italian, probably more than 6 or 7 languages she could speak. Dawn Neal wrote, after graduating, Foley quickly mastered Pali. Oh, I can't imagine anybody mastering Pali quickly. For me, it has been a noble struggle. Her first published paper on women leaders in the Buddhist Reformation, she was not allowed to present that paper at the 9th International Congress of Orientalists in 1893. Her Pali professor presented a summary on her behalf. Here he is, her Pali professor, Thomas William Rhys-Davids. According to Susan Murcott, there was no appreciable study of Buddhism until the 19th century. That's when he, a civil servant in Sri Lanka, collected a complete version of the Pali Tipitaka that existed in palm leaf manuscripts. And when he returned to England in 1881, he founded the Pali Text Society to foster the cooperation of scholars in the transliteration of Pali into Roman letters and the translation and publication of Pali Buddhist texts into English. Dawn Neal wrote, as early as 1877, Mr. Rhys-Davids had mused that future scholarship of texts may discover whether they contain an older system hidden under a later one. And Carolyn Rhys-Davids began to attempt to uncover this older system around 1927. Well, the cat's out of the bag. They got married in 1894. Look at what a handsome couple they were. She was positively beautiful. They had 3 children. She was described as a fearless traveler, an ardent mountaineer, a talented tennis player, could beat most others at billiards. But I say she was very brave to have 3 children in her late 30s and early 40s. The couple produced a tremendous amount of, skip back, so sorry. They produced a tremendous volume of Pali translations. She lectured on Indian philosophy, and it was said she was such a brilliant lecturer that she inspired the next generation of Pali scholars. These are photos of her son. There were a lot of photos of her son, even a biography written about him. He died in 1917. He died 8 years after Carolyn published her volume, Psalms of the Sisters. Just 5 years later, her husband died, and Carolyn became the president of the Pali Text Society, a position she held for 20 years. After the death of her son, her work entered a new phase. According to Neil, she developed a personal conviction that the Buddha's oral teachings had been fundamentally reshaped in the very texts that she had dedicated decades to translating. Carolyn was grieving. She became involved in various forms of psychic communication with the dead, first attempting to reach her son through seances and then through automatic writing. During the war, spiritualism was sweeping England. There was a religious movement based on the belief that spirits of the dead exist and that you could communicate with lost loved ones. And in the 1920s, spiritualism was said to have more than 8 million followers in the United States and Europe, mostly drawn from the middle and upper classes. There were highly educated people interested in spiritualism. In a footnote in Neil's article, I read that at age 82, Mrs. Rhys-Davids stated that she had made contact with her dead son in Light, a journal of spiritualism. Dawn Neal wrote, "This blending of her personal convictions with Buddhist scholarship in her later works has led to dismissals of her and all her writings. And the effect of such dismissals is to devalue her earlier contributions to Buddhist studies, which were extraordinary." Dawn Neal reminded her readers, consider the use of the specific term Buddhist psychology. Over the first 22 years of her career, Rhys-Davids wrote about Buddhist psychology in a half a dozen titles. She often consulted monastics like Lady Sayadaw, oh boy, I hope I pronounced that right, the father of the insight meditation tradition in Burma. He called her the London Devi. He clearly considered her deep learning investigation in Buddhism to be valid. Unlike most of her contemporaries, she held that the system of detailed mental analysis contained in the Abhidhamma was the basis of Buddhism. Indeed, many scholars consider her finest work to be her translations of the Abhidhamma. This is I.B. Horner. I'm embarrassed to admit I did not know I.B. Horner was a woman. According to I.B. Horner, Carolyn's interest in Buddhism was initially encouraged by that Pali professor, Thomas Rhys-Davids, who lured her by the bait of its women poets and psychology. I.B. Horner wrote that Carolyn began evaluating the age of fragments of text within the Pali Canon to discover whether they contained an older system hidden under a later one. She was a pioneer in her way of tracing the historical authenticity of the teachings. Although earlier in her career, she accepted more mainstream beliefs about Buddhist teachings, later in life, she rejected the concept of anatta as an original Buddhist teaching. In 1942, Mrs. Rhys-Davids died. I.B. Horner became the honorary secretary of the Pali Text Society, and in 1959, she became the president. Looking for photos of Caroline, I found the 1939 cover of her last published work. I wondered if it included her new interpretations due to her evolving spiritual beliefs. I couldn't find a PDF of it. The doctrine of anatta, as one of her new beliefs, did not apply to the belief in a changing, growing soul that could deny death. The vision of man willing a becoming of his own growth over multiple lifetimes. I think she was filled with an energy, constant striving and effort and endeavor, a Virium, to do as much as possible to carry out her mission. In yet another link that Stephen sent to me, and Stephen, I think you must have been a reference librarian in a previous existence. In this book, I found her mission. She wanted to tell two things. First, how the religion that we now call Buddhism was different at first from what it is now. And second, how man's more will in his wayfaring is not yet taught as it needs to be. Mrs. Rhys-Davids was unafraid to say what she believed. This is a cover of Sir Edwin Arnold's book published in 1879. It was one of the first attempts to popularize Buddhism for a Western readership. And she said, "Light of Asia is not a happy title, save perhaps for the publisher. It goes too far for most Christians. It doesn't go far enough for Buddhists. It is not for either correct if by light of we mean that which lights up Asia, since this is obviously uncharitable to Islam and Parsiism and ignores the entire north of that continent." Pretty harsh. In another chapter of Living Foundations of Buddhism, I read about the correspondence that she had with the Venerable Buddhadatta. They never met. They corresponded in Pali from about 1912 until she died in 1942. She encouraged him to study English. She enabled him to go to Europe, and she helped him handle difficult editors. And when I searched for images of the Venerable Buddhadatta, I was stunned to discover that he wrote my favorite go-to Pali dictionary. This is Ananda, and I hope I don't murder this name, Guruge, who wrote the book, The Living Fountains of Buddhism. He made a study of Mrs. Rhys-Davids' correspondence with the Venerable Buddhadatta. He wrote, "A notable discovery is the degree to which she has been misunderstood, misconstrued, and reviled by those who paid little attention to her mission. She raised many questions, and she did not accept traditionally proffered answers. And for nearly 2 generations, Pali and Buddhist scholars have grappled with her observations without coming to the questions she had so seriously and sympathetically asked." Mr. Guruge wrote, as far back as 1932, she made a plea for the translation of the Tripitaka into Sinhala. Sinhala. Sri Lankan monks in the early 1910s had been opposed to such an idea, but she urged that it was very important to see the Tripitaka was made available in every Buddhist home. Obviously, she loved Buddhism, and she worked tirelessly all her life on that love. Her voice captivated me. I often find introductions to be very dry and boring, but not hers. She bristled at a translator who translated without the aid of commentary especially when he suggested that the poems must have been shaped by a man. She wrote, "Not often since the patriarchal age set in has woman succeeded in so breaking through her barriers as to set on lasting record the expression of herself and of things as they appeared to her, but to assume that because this happened seldom, therefore this collection of documents, though ascribed to her, are necessarily not by her, is to carry over far the truth. He that hath, to him shall be given, and she that hath not, from her shall be taken, even that which she hath." So can I say she rewrote a verse from the Bible and gave it a feminist twist? Sure, she bristled. Do you think she remembered a time when she wasn't allowed to present her own paper? She strove to make her translation of the Therigatha such that an English reader might feel confident that the lines before him do not omit subject matter that is in the original, nor add subject matter that is not. She used sister in preference to nun to keep her Indian recluses free from an implication of confinement within walls. In her introduction, she warns that the commentators' explanations were legends woven out of legends. We meet 20 sisters in the Pali Canon, and half of those are repeated in the Abhidhamma. Names do not always agree. In 17 poems, the Therigatha assigns one author's name in the Abhidhamma and another. There is a similar lack of agreement between name and poem in the Samyutta version, and the poems that the sisters spoke accounted for the motives that drove them into the homeless life. Some of the stanzas are common property among several sisters, and many sisters' life stories begin with these words. She too, having made her resolve under former Buddhas and heaping up good of age enduring efficacy, was born in this Buddha era. She commented that the sister's goal is envisioned as liberty or emancipation that was won, and she mentioned that that occurred in 23% of their poems, but in the poems of the brethren, only 13% mentioned their liberty or their emancipation. So I thought we could read one or two of her poems, because not all of them are because of a terrible tragedy. Some of them are just because life is sometimes boring or dissatisfying, and you just don't want it like that anymore. This is the poem from Sumangala's mother. No name, she was just known as Sumangala's mother. And after she became a bhikkhuni later in life, thinking on all she had suffered, she was much affected. Her insight quickened, and she attained arahantship. These were her words. "O woman well set free, how free am I? How thoroughly free from kitchen drudgery! Me, stained and squalid among my cooking pots, my brutal husband ranked as even less than the sunshades he sits and weaves alway. Purged now of all my former lust and hate, I dwell musing at ease beneath the shade of spreading boughs. Oh, but 'tis well with me." I love that. Do we have time for one more, or should we have questions?
I think it would be great to have questions, but maybe, you know, it won't take too long for you to read this one. Let's do this and then open it up.
Uttama, also having heaped up good under former Buddhas, she came at last to hear Patachara speak. And these are her words. And her first words, this first stanza was shared by several of the sisters. 4 times, nay 5, I sallied forth from my cell and roamed afield to find peace of mind, long vainly sought, and governance of my thoughts I could not bring into captivity. To me she came, that noble bhikkhuni, who was my foster mother in the faith. She taught me the norm, wherein I learnt the nature of this transitory self. And well I minded all, even as she taught. For 7 days I sat in jhana joy and ease, cross-legged. On the 8th day at last I stretched my limbs and went my way serene, for I had burst asunder the surrounding gloom. Also wonderful.
Well, thank you, Diane, for that beautiful presentation.
That was extraordinary, Diane. Thank you so much for sharing that all with us.
Indeed.
Well, I love her.
That's, yes.
I want to be her. To have her facility of languages and to make the discoveries that she made and to question. She was unafraid to question.
She seemed a truly fearless person.
Yes.
So Diane, if you could unshare your screen, we'll open it up for Q&A. Thank you so much. Wow, there was so much there. I have so many questions, but I want to open it up for anyone else who may have questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your blue hand and we'll call on you. And if no one has any questions, I have plenty.
Why don't you go first, Regina?
Sure.
And we'll also ask everyone keep their questions quite short if possible to allow more people.
So Diane, in your presentation, you had said that I believe that there need to be more teaching of this concept, more will.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if you can share with us what that means. I have not heard of it.
Well, let me get back to the part. She said, how man's more will in his wayfaring is not yet taught as it needs to be. She said, I see men holding up ideals to be followed without a word on the will by which alone man can value what they hold up. He needs will as to the last mandate of earth life, that next step, which as yet is so willfully put aside.
I see. So the notion of willpower has validity then in this context.
Well, willpower or just will to strive to make yourself better.
Great. Thank you.
Diane, I have to ask, I have sort of a theory, and I was wondering what you might think, because I think, unfortunately, those of us who have actually heard of Mrs. Rhys-Davids, unfortunately, most of what we hear about is her sort of unorthodox views that came about after the death of her son. And we don't hear so much about all these incredible contributions that she made prior to that and also after that. And I have to wonder whether this kind of narrative that we've been told about her kind of going off the rails, this despondent woman, is almost kind of an attempt to neutralize her as a significant scholar. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, that makes sense to me because, of course, she was a woman.
Right.
And I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, we don't hear so much that she was the first person in the Western world to translate the entire Dhamma Sangani. An incredible achievement for anybody today, but to be able to do it when there was no one you could talk to about it, and there were almost the Pali English dictionary didn't exist at that time.
How did she do it?
She could not even look up words in a real dictionary yet. There was maybe one. She just translated this whole book. In fact, she is one of the to this day, one of the most prolific translators of Pali into English that ever lived in the Western world.
Yeah.
Yet all we hear about is her sadness after the death of her son. And so I hope we can do a small part today in sort of rehabilitating this extraordinary person's
Well,
reputation.
I think Ananda, is it Guruge? Is that how you pronounce it? Guruge? Guruge?
I'm not sure.
The man who wrote The Living Fountains of Buddhism? He was trying to resurrect good feelings about her.
Yes, I think so. I mean, the fact that she held years-long correspondence with master sayadaws in Burma in Pali, it certainly, one would think that they took her quite seriously if they were willing to have this very long correspondence with her. They thought that she was an extraordinary person, and they probably thought that she was their person in the West to sort of be able to begin and spread Buddhism.
Well, and the fact that she wanted all of the Buddhist homes to be able to read those words in their own language.
Yes.
Yes, she definitely did she influenced so many people in such a positive way. And she did absolutely influence the spread of Buddhism to the West. And for that, I'm so very grateful. And we have two hands raised so far. We have first Brahman Levi, and then we have Jean. So Brahman.
Diane, I'm wondering if you could repeat what you said in terms of her view of anatta, and maybe Regina and Stephen kind of unpack it, because I didn't quite understand it. I mean, I know what anatta is, I mean, intellectually anyway. Anyway.
And before you answer, Diane, we're coming up on time. For those of you in Southeast Asia who have to, I know that you've gotten up early and it's a Monday morning for you. So if you have to leave us early, please, we understand. And for those of you, the rest of us, where it's evening time, if you'd like to stay a bit longer for more Q&A, we would like that very much. We are going to extend the evening for a bit. So if you can hang out for a bit longer in the morning before you go to work, or in the evening, please do. This is going to be an interesting conversation. So Diane, regarding Brahman Livy's question on anatta.
Yes, well, you must understand that I don't understand a lot of this. I am merely reading words that came to me from Don Neal's article, that the doctrine of anatta did not apply to the belief in a changing, growing soul that could deny death. Does that help?
A little bit. I mean, in terms of that, the will issue that you were talking about, so that would contradict anatta, the necessity of having the will to improve oneself and go forward, so to speak. Do you agree with that at all?
I find all of these ideas very challenging. I don't know. I would have to think on it some more. But
Well,
Stephen, Stephen found that there was a sutta that she had that disturbed her very much. Stephen, did you want to talk about that at all?
Maybe I'll just say very briefly that I was told a story about Mrs. Rhys-Davids that after the death of her son, she was sent or told about or reminded about a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. I think it's the 43rd Samyutta. It's called the Yoda Sutta. Yoda, by the way, means warrior in Pali. And
for all you Star Trek fans.
Right. That's where Yoda comes from, the Samyutta Nikaya. And what it says, very briefly, is that those who fight in battle go to a special hell. And I think this was very disturbing for her because, of course, it said essentially that her son, having engaged in battle and killed people, would be going to some very unfortunate destination. But it would seem as if she took this sutta in a sense like he was going to a place, sort of like the Wagnerian Valhalla for warriors. And I have to wonder if whether this was sort of the genesis of this kind of thinking that she began to entertain. But as you say, I think it's tempting to sort of very quickly dismiss this line of thought that she had. But I have a feeling, knowing how formidable a thinker she was, that this was a very nuanced and complicated argument, which I am not really qualified to speak to.
I'm wondering if there's anyone here who feels qualified to speak to it. Not putting anyone on the spot. Just curious, it could happen. And if you are, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, that's fine. We're all learning and exploring. Jean, your question? Make sure to unmute yourself, Jean. Okay.
Okay, finally. Yes, I just was interested in knowing more about the book and all that you got in, showed us. What book? Yes. What is it essentially about? Is it about her translation of those particular poems?
It was the translations of the poems, the Psalms of the Sisters, also the Psalms of the Brethren. I haven't even gotten to that part yet.
I see. Okay.
I've only gotten through maybe this much.
Thank you.
But it includes the histories of them, which apparently were in the Apadana. Am I saying that right? Apadana.
Badana.
It's in, yeah, it's in the Kudakaya.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I don't know. Stephen knows that.
We can put that as a resource, and I think that would be something valuable to do on the website, which, as you know, is suttainthecity.com, and we will put that up there.
Yeah, Apadana is correct. It's a part of the Kudaka Nikaya.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question. Thank you for that, Jean. We have another question from Sohn.
Ask her one more thing.
Oh, sure, of course. So
I just was wondering what you were going to do with all this beautiful research that you've done.
I ordered her book today on the norm because I wasn't quite sure what the norm was all about. And many of the sisters spoke about having learned the norm, capital N-O-R-M.
Mm-hmm.
So I've ordered her book just to see what she had to say about that. A different program, perhaps, that Stephen could give.
Yeah. More about this. We can't let it go.
I'm thinking it probably just means the middle way, the norm, the middle way. It's my guess.
that's a good guess. I believe Sohn is up next. We'd like to hear your question, Sohn.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Diane.
Hi, Sohn.
Great research. Thank you very much. Is there any research that talks about her practice? You know, I think we all know about her scholarly work. Does she practice anywhere with anybody with any particular method that you know of?
I don't know enough about her. I really don't. I am going to continue to study up on her. But I don't know if she sat and meditated, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's great, Diane, to hear that you're going to continue studying up on her. And I'm sure it's hard to find facts because, you know, she was a female and so perhaps of less interest to people. But the more that we can find, perhaps the more we can unearth these gems that you have shared with us this evening. So that's great. We have Ken with his hand raised.
Yeah, the passage that you read, Diane, where she was talking about will, reminded me very much of Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, who were very influential at that time. And I don't know to what extent she read them or followed them, but it sounded very reminiscent. And both of them studied Buddhism and had a lot to say about Buddhism, and were responsible in the 19th century for spreading the ideas of Buddhism, or at least their versions of it, among intellectuals.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you. I've noted it.
Okay. I know, Stephen, that you're a fan of Schopenhauer. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I just don't know about Mrs. Rhys-Davids' personal practice, but it wouldn't be surprising if she would be, of course, influenced by the leading thinkers of her day. I think it's a truth that all of us, like it or not, and find ourselves in a world where we are influenced by what's going on around us. Even if we think, well, we really know about Buddhism today, and back then it was kind of primitive, and what did she know? But I have a feeling that 100 years from now, people might look back at us today and say, well, back then they didn't really know about Buddhism, but today we really are the ones who truly understand what Gautama was telling us.
Thank you. Lee, you have your hand up?
Yes, just a comment. My teacher, the Venerable Ayakema, wanted to translate virya, which usually is energy, as will. So that fits very much, very similar to what Carolyn Rhys-Davids was translating.
That is so interesting, especially it seems today, the current zeitgeist is to look upon will as something that's kind of almost negative. Like I hear so often, well, you can't use will to do this, you can't use your will to do that, or perhaps that we're beyond or unable to harness this. But it's great I'm a big fan of Ayakema, and the idea of translating that into will is it's definitely fascinating to me, and freeing in a way, because it gives the idea that we can affect these things, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think the word she actually used was willpower. In other words, if you're going to do this practice, you're going to have to use your willpower to actually get yourself to sit down and do the practice and keep the precepts and so forth. And that's what virya meant to her.
I like that.
Thank you so much. And it certainly makes a lot of sense to me in terms of the Therigatha, that these nuns overcame so many obstacles to be able to reach their final liberation. And if anyone had virya, it would be those women.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Who else? I can ask a question while maybe someone back there is summoning up the courage to raise their hand. So this one's kind of seems easy, but I'm just so terribly curious. So did Mr. Rhys-Davids, he had the some of the original manuscripts, I believe you said in your presentation. Do you know what has become of them?
No, I don't.
I would love to see them in a museum somewhere.
Do you mean the manuscripts of his own, or of
the Pali on the leaves? But it looks like Ayavimala has raised her hand. Perhaps she has something to say. Ayavimala, would you let us know if you have any thoughts on this? You're muted. You're muted.
I had a different question.
Oh, okay.
Sri Lankans have a lot of the teachings on the leaves, and I think they are the Rhys-Davids are respected in Sri Lanka. That's my feeling. So he probably gave them back to them. Would be my guess.
That would be great.
Can I ask my other question?
Of course.
And I have access to Diane since I live near her, so I don't want to take a lot of, I don't want to be greedy. I can sit down with her. But my question was, you know, when you talked about that she was finding that she thought the text had been changed from the original teachings. What was the upshot of that, of her concerns about that?
Well, I think it was that some words that we associate with Buddhism now all the time, like anatta, were not in the very earliest teachings. One of the things that I read in Susan Murcott's book was that the earliest teachings were about views. It was very important to have the right view. And Bhikkhuni, you know that's my biggest problem is having the right view.
That's a lot of our biggest problems. This has been great. We have just a few minutes left, and we have Gita. So you'll be the last one to ask a question, Gita.
Actually, it was not a question I had. Can you all hear me? Thank you for this opportunity.
We can hear you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I have the original collection of the Pali translations from 30 years ago, from Rhys-Davids and I.B. Horner. They're hardcover. I bought it through Wisdom Publications. So I have the entire collection much before Bhante Bodhi came up with his translations. It's a tougher read, I found, overall. You had to know some basic Pali words because some of the words were left untranslated. It was just like directly the Pali word that was there. So someone who was new to Buddhism would have found it difficult to read through and understand, because Bhante Bodhi's translations were fabulous. They were so user-friendly. And as a matter of fact, since I have like 2-3 sets from the different time periods, my son just started reading, and the Digha Nikaya hasn't been translated by Bhante Bodhi, so he left it. He was reading the original book that I have, and he said, Mom, this is a lot harder to understand than Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations. So I thought I'd share that. The pronunciation of Ananda Guruge was correct.
Guruge.
What she had
Thank
said.
you.
Yeah, Ananda Guruge. Yes.
Ananda Guruge.
Yes.
Like the name.
Thank you for all your efforts, and thank you for sharing, and thank you for giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gita. Thank you. Stephen, you're our resident Pali scholar here. Any final words on Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations versus Rhys-Davids?
Well, no, I'm not an expert in that. As Gita said, people still read Rhys-Davids. Both Rhys-Davids, I think, work together on the Digha Nikaya, and some people still enjoy those too. We have to remember that the Rhys-Davids were the people, in large part, who actually came up with many of the translation choices that we use today, like the word mindfulness. That was essentially invented by Mr. Rhys-Davids. He decided on that rendering, and that rendering has gone kind of viral in a way. It has entered everyone's consciousness, and that's thanks to him. And I'm sure there are many translation choices of Mrs. Rhys-Davids that are very much the same. And so they are still speaking to us